Hey guys! So I'm here with my August reading wrap up. I really hope the rain isn't too loud because it is hammering it down. Filming this on the last day of August and really autumn feels like it's on its way. I'm not sure when this is going up, so hopefully early September. But yeah, fingers crossed it's not too distracting. So I'm looking down because I'm starting I've read 6 books in August, which I'm really shocked by and pleased with. And 3 of them are on my Kindle. So the first is the Antiquary by Walter Scott, which I'm hoping is showing without too much reflection. This was a really long read. I've given it 1 star. It took me, I think I started reading it in June. It was a really long kind of classic, all about a journey that somebody makes with a antiquary up to Scotland and these kind of like weird adventures that are linked. A lot of it is written in like a kind of Scottish dialect, and basically I read my Kindle books before bed and I found it really hard trying to get into the mindset of trying to read something like that. So next up is, oh, gonna hold it without the glare, My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. It's a book set in Nigeria about 2 sisters. One of them's quite like sensible, she's a nurse in the local hospital, and the other sister keeps killing her boyfriends. But the sister that's quite like nice and sensible is the older one, and her mum basically blames her for everything that happens. So when she finds out that her younger sister has killed somebody, she doesn't tell anybody and she helps her cover up because she knows that ultimately she'll get the blame somehow. I think I gave this 4 stars. I'm not 100%, it was either 4 or 5. And yeah, I really I felt like this was a really like good insight into Nigerian culture. It's not something that I've like read much around, and it was really fast paced. It was like if you want a quick read to get you out of a reading slump, I would really recommend this. It's quite funny, it's quite dark at times, the author is very good at describing these murders in a way that isn't overtly graphic and in your face, but very easy to imagine, so I can still like picture some scenes from the book. And yeah, it was like a really good insight into like family dynamics and what you would do for your family ultimately. So yeah, as I said, really enjoyed that, and I think the cover's really lovely. And then the third Kindle book that I finished is Reading in the Dark by Seamus Deane. I'm trying to remember his first name. Yeah, Seamus Deane. This really reminded me of Seamus Heaney's poetry. It's a book written from the perspective of a child growing up to an adult. It's like each chapter takes place with sometimes like a couple of years in between, sometimes a few months, but the book takes place over quite a number of years, like spanning decades. It's set in Ireland. It starts in the 40s, I think. Let me have a look. Yeah, it starts in 1945, and it progresses to, oh, there we go. It progresses and it kind of looks at Irish politics from a child's kind of point of view. There's lots of mentions of tensions between Catholics and Protestants. There's a few mentions of the IRA. There's lots of like Irish folklore ghost stories in it, and yeah, I really enjoyed this. I'm going to give it 4 stars. I think one of the key elements in it, as well as looking at this kind of like Irish kind of like folklore and history and background, was this growing up where the boy started to learn things that had been kind of concealed to him when he was a child. So family secrets that he was considered obviously too young to know, and then gradually he learns more and realises why everything is the way it is within his family. So yeah, it was a really well written book and I really enjoyed it. And then on to actual physical books. It was a very good reading month this month. I feel like I've had a couple of months where I've had like 2 or 3 like 1 or 2 star reads over the month, or quite a few 3 stars where they're just a bit meh. And this month, yeah, much better apart from the Antiquary. So this is Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel, Garcia, Marquez. It's been recommended to me over and over again, and I've never gotten around to reading it because it's just a bit intimidating. It's not a super long classic, but it's not the shortest. The font in here isn't super big, and I just get put off when I see quite a dense classic, because it's quite a commitment if you don't enjoy it. So I'm really glad that I love this. I've given it 5 stars. The opening paragraph was probably the most poetic opening section that I've ever read in a book, and the whole way through, all of the writing, it was like the most, yeah, like poetic writing that I've ever read that isn't poetry but is actually prose. The author is very, very good at playing on your senses and looking at what somebody can hear and see and smell in certain situations, and linking smells and linking kind of motifs back over and over again throughout the book, and I can see why it's so loved. The book follows the story of Florentino Ariza, who basically falls in love with a woman called Femina Daza, and he kind of pursues her. He's this kind of like depressed, thin figure who wears a lot of dark clothes, and he writes her loads and loads of really intense love poems, and his love is so intense that it takes on some of the symptoms of cholera. She's a bit scared by his love. Her dad kind of forbids it and takes her away and does everything he can to make her forget about it. So the book starts off and all the characters are quite elderly, and her husband, who is the doctor, have basically reached a point where they're not really in love. They have this platonic relationship where she cares for him and he cares for her, and they're in this routine that keeps them happy. And then he dies, and on the day of his kind of wake that he has in the house, Florentino Ariza turns up 50 years on from when they were first in love and declares to Femina that he's still in love with her. And then the book is told retrospectively to see, you know, who is this man, how did they fall in love, how did they fall out of love, and how did they get to this point. And yeah, it's just a really like intense book. There's a lot more kind of like sex scenes. They aren't very graphic, but they are quite common in the book. As it goes on, they get more and more intense, and there's some quite like sordid sex scenes. There's a bit of grooming going on of younger girls, and it just kind of, it was not what I was expecting, but everything was told in like such a beautiful way. It talks about love and sex and loss, and how love and sex intertwine, and how sex and loss intertwine, and you can just see like the content and the writing were just so great. You can see why it's been such a popular book. And now I really want to read 100 Years of Solitude, which is by the same author. My voice feels like it's going a bit. Next is the rest of the story by Sarah Dessen, which I've given 5 stars again. I love Sarah Dessen's books. She was my favourite author when I was a teen, when I was like 14, 15. So this tells the story of Emma Saylor, who, Saylor is her middle name, and her mum was an alcoholic and a drug addict, and she died when she was quite young. Her parents split up when she was even younger, and her dad took care of her because her mum just wasn't able to. And basically she's happily living with her dad, and her dad remarries, and she's very happy with her dad's new wife. But when they go on their honeymoon, there's nowhere for her to stay, and she ends up going and staying with her mum's family, so her grandma on her mum's side, and aunties and cousins and things like that. And she realises that this whole side of her has been kept from her. Her dad always calls her Emma, and her mum and her mum's family have always called her Saylor. And she kind of spends a summer there trying to work out at this lake, which is where her parents first met, obviously where her mum's family lived. She tries to work out if she's Emma or if she's Saylor, and it's this journey of finding out who she really is, what her past is like, and learning about this whole other family that she didn't have. And it's just so well written. It's like the perfect young adult kind of like chick flick book. If I had to describe Sarah Dessen's writing, I'd say that it was like Jacqueline Wilson but for a kind of young adult version. So yeah, it's really, really good, and I would recommend it. Right, I'm so aware this has been so long because I really loved all the books, but this is the last book I read this month and it's a 5-star read again. It's 13 by Steve Cavanagh, and I'm going to make my book of the month video in a few moments about this one, so I'm going to keep this really, really brief. Basically the story is all about a serial killer who enters the jury of a murder trial, and he does what he can to kind of alter the outcome of it. It's very intense and a very, very good thriller, and that's all I'm going to say for the moment. But yeah, this was a really good month for reading. I'm hoping September's going to be as good, but we will see. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!